This is the Bowne Report for March 31st, 2026. Coming up first on the Bowne Report, no, we're not going to talk about Kristi Noem's freakish husband. We're going to talk about the cascading collapse of the global supply chains that keep civilization humming as the fallout from Middle East conflict slams into everyday life like a freight train with no brakes. Fertilizer stocks are drying up fast, threatening the very food on your table, while critical pharmaceutical ingredients face mounting shortages that could leave hospitals scrambling and patients in the lurch. Then the prospect of severed undersea internet cables turning the digital world dark, paired with Qatar's helium depletion crippling everything from medical scanners to semiconductors production, and jet fuel reserves running critically low, grounding flights and spiking travel costs into the stratosphere. Later, incoming water shortages set to trigger harsh restrictions on populations already stretched thin, and alarming new targets designated by Iranian terrorist organizations striking worldwide, with America squarely in the crosshairs. And the globalist architects behind all this beautiful chaos. They're counting on you being too distracted, too broke, too scared, and too stupid to connect the dots. How much of this is pure entropy and how much is engineered in the name of Lockdown 2.0 is in the finer details. This is the Bowne Report. I'm John Bowne. Let's get into it. Cutting through the fog of war and the spin of the globalist media machine as we stagger into the fifth week of this never-ending global reset in the Middle East, the situation in Iran has turned into one big multi-dimensional gridlock. It's hammering economies worldwide like a drunk on a bender, while it lays bare all the brutal, stupid realities of a dying regime trying to survive in the usual power-mad freaks playing their usual proxy games with other people's lives and money. You got the U.S. and Israel dropping bombs on anything that moves, missile factories, naval yards, steel plants, air defenses, even a few spots that smell like they might have been dreaming about nukes. Just enough to keep the Israelis running to their bomb shelters all day long like it's some kind of sadistic psychological game. It's called Operation Epic Fury, according to Hegseth. They've smashed 13,000 targets already, sunk 150 Iranian boats, and turned the Iranian Air Force into expensive scrap metal. It should be redubbed Operation Epic Fail, because meanwhile the mullahs and their Revolutionary Guard buddies are still standing there in their robes, shaking their fists, firing off whatever missiles they got left in dribs and drabs, just itching for a ground invasion that they have been preparing for decades. They hit a refinery here, a tanker there, wound a bunch of American troops on a base in Saudi Arabia, and now they're threatening to set the whole Strait of Hormuz on fire if anybody gets too cute about ground troops. And the Iranian people, they're catching hell from both sides as usual. Bombs falling on neighborhoods, kids getting killed, businesses shutting down, the economy circling the toilet bowl even faster than before. President is saying that the whole thing could collapse in a few weeks if they don't cut a deal, but the hardliners in the Guard just tell them to shut up and wave the flag harder, while the new regime leaders play footsie with the Pentagon. Classic. Meanwhile, back here at home, gas prices are climbing like they're trying to reach the moon as tankers are getting abandoned in the Persian Gulf, and everybody's acting shocked. Shocked that blowing up the world's biggest oil choke point might cause a little inconvenience at the pump. It's the same old mind-numbing Groundhog Day, ladies and gentlemen. A bunch of rich, powerful old men in suits and turbans playing Risk with real human beings while the rest of us pay for the gas, the body bags, and the endless parade of righteous speeches about freedom and resistance. They never learn. They never will, because war is just too damn profitable and way more fun than actually fixing anything with common sense. Plus, the COVID lockdown crowd is now salivating over the prospect of their stock in petty tyranny skyrocketing. That's the way it is, folks. And if you believe any of the polished up fairy tales coming out of Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran, well, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd love to sell you. I'd much rather bring you the good news rather than the bad, but every time I turn on the mainstream media machine, all I hear is talk about what got blown up today. So, per usual, it's my job to bring you the awful truth so that you are properly informed. But please, for the sake of your own well-being, after I brief you on all this, take a break, do some yard work, walk the dog, read a book, exercise, listen to some music, because there's more to life than what these morons in D.C. are doing.
We've got the 50s, the 25s, the 10s, 5s, 1s. If you add them all up, you get to an ounce of gold. Now, this is also 1 troy ounce of 24 karat gold. It's an American gold buffalo. Very cool coin here. If you wanted to spend gold, to use gold as a currency, which would be easier, this gold coin or all of these gold backs? I think it's pretty easy to see the gold backs win in a barter situation. I can break them down way more times than I can this gold coin.
Folks, while the fiat Ponzi scheme keeps printing us into oblivion and the banks play games with your future, there's a better way to protect what you've earned. Goldbacks. Beautiful, spendable, gold-backed currency you can actually hold in your hand. Real gold, fractionally backed, legal tender in multiple states, and immune to the digital reset they're rushing us toward. Whether the grid goes dark, the banks freeze, or the Great Reset crowd flips the switch, Goldbacks give you real money outside their control system. Head over to goldbacks.com right now, stack some freedom, and take back your financial sovereignty. Don't wait for the next crash. Get yours today at goldbacks.com. The fertilizer-pharma shock, a compounding crisis that ties energy choke points to crop yields and pill bottles in a chain reaction no one in Washington wants to admit is happening. 1/3 of the world's seaborne fertilizer trade and nearly half of the global urea, the nitrogen backbone that makes crops actually grow. It's what crops crave. Normally, it flows through there. Iran has shut it down to U.S., Israel, and allied shipping. Vessels sit blocked or rerouted at massive costs. Urea export prices from the Middle East have rocketed from under $500 per metric ton before the strikes to over $700 or more, with analysts reporting jumps of 40 to 68% in weeks ahead, and some forecasts of doubling if the closure drags on. Overall, fertilizer prices sit up more than 50% year over year, hitting levels that echo the worst spikes since 2022. Right now, as American farmers push into critical spring planting, the squeeze is immediate. 1 in 4 has no fertilizer fully secured.
We don't have any way to pass those additional costs on, and we're already looking at very small profits per acre on crops.
I've never seen prices jump to levels like they are now as fast as they've jumped.
Nitrogen application windows are closing in muddy Midwest fields soaked by excess rain, especially across the southeast of Iowa, western Illinois, and northeastern Missouri. Corn acres are projected down sharply, perhaps 4 to 5% or more, as growers shift toward less fertilizer-hungry soybeans. Spring wheat plantings could hit the lowest since 1970. Those who cannot apply adequate nitrogen face yield drops of 20 to 40% on staples this harvest season. The global food pain carries a built-in lag, but the 2026 crops are already compromised. It compounds from every direction. Russia, controlling up to 40% of ammonium nitrate trade, has suspended exports for at least a month to prioritize its own planting. China, the largest fertilizer producer, has banned or restricted exports of key nitrogen-potassium blends, phosphates, and more, keeping supply home to shield domestic prices. India faces gas shortages that threaten its own urea output. Australia wrestles diesel tightness during its winter seeding window. Before this escalation, 318 million people already stared down acute hunger. The UN and analysts warn another 45 million could slide into crisis if disruptions stretch past June, with 70,000 tons of food aid stranded at sea, and the World Bank math showing every 1% fertilizer price rise feeding roughly 0.45% higher food commodity costs. Bread, rice, and basics in vulnerable capitals from Cairo to Lagos to Dhaka are headed for painful spikes. Now layer on the pharmaceutical strike. Iranian missiles hammered the Niyat Hovav industrial zone in southern Israel. Fire and chemical concerns erupted at facilities tied to Adama for pesticides and chemicals, with the zone also housing major Teva pharmaceutical operations, the world's largest generic drug maker. Even contained, the disruption lands on a supply chain already thin. Teva generics cover cancer treatments, heart medications, respiratory drugs, and neurological essentials that hospitals worldwide, especially in developing nations, rely on as affordable lifelines. Pre-existing shortages were already bad enough. Any meaningful gap here cannot be replaced overnight. Prices will climb, access will tighten, and chronic patients could face rationing or costly switches in the months ahead. Tie the threads, and the picture is stark. Fertilizer grows the food. Energy, especially diesel and natural gas, powers the tractors, the ships, and the plants that move and make it. Pharma keeps the workforce functional. All three now strain under the same conflict. In the short 3 to 6 months, fertilizer and diesel costs drive immediate food price acceleration. U.S. and global planting shortfalls begin registering in crop progress reports and reduced yields. Generic drug shortages surface in hospitals, particularly for ongoing treatments, straining insurance and supply systems. Inflation ticks higher again, complicating any central bank easing and hitting developing nations hardest with renewed risk of unrest over bread prices. In a nutshell, you ever notice how they keep telling you the world's this big, efficient, modern miracle? Everything's just in time. Ships zip through tiny little straits. Factories churn out pills and plant food like magic. And somehow it all keeps the supermarket shelves full and grandma's heart meds coming on schedule. The whole just-in-time global system was always a house of cards built on cheap energy, fragile choke points, and the arrogant fantasy that nobody would ever kick the table. Well, somebody just kicked the table hard. So yeah, the bill for this fertilizer pharma shock is delayed, but it's coming due and it's non-negotiable. Stock up what you reasonably can. Push for real domestic resilience instead of more just-in-time globalist daydreams, because when the system finally burps, it doesn't ask permission, and it sure as hell doesn't care how clever your hashtags are. That's the truth they don't want sprayed in your face, but truth itself is going to be harder to swallow in the coming months. In a sense, I guess that's a good thing. It's time we build up a tolerance to the amount of truth we can handle, because it's coming. Mark Twain always said, never tell the truth to people who are not worthy of it, which is so true, but in times like these, we are all becoming worthy of it.
You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me. No. I am the one who knocks.
And of course, now this brings us to the helium crisis. Of course, the helium crisis. Everyone knew the helium crisis would happen. It starts with something most people have never thought about: helium. On March 2nd, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, Qatar's North Field, which supplies 33% of the world's helium as a byproduct of LNG, or liquefied natural gas. It all went dark. Now, 200 cryogenic containers sit stranded in the Persian Gulf. Each one holds 41,000 liters of liquid helium cooled to negative 269 degrees Celsius. No refrigeration on board, just insulation, buying 35 to 48 days before it boils off into the atmosphere. And the clock started 26 plus days ago. Reliquefaction, yeah, that's possible, but it requires specialized plants most ports don't have. Spot prices have already surged 70 to 100%. This is the fifth helium shortage since 2006. Why does this matter? No substitute exists for ultra-pure 99.999999% helium in EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography. The backside cooling that lets TSMC, Samsung, and Intel etch the 2 nanometer chips powering AI GPUs, data centers, and the very systems running targeting in this conflict. Basically, the chips are screwed. AI is no mas, which might be a good thing. No helium, no EUV, no advanced chips. AI hits a wall. Samsung and SK Hynix are checking inventories daily, paying premium prices to avoid disruptions. India, with 70,000 MRI machines, relies on liquid helium for superconducting magnets and faces scan delays or shutdowns. Most of its supply came from Qatar, and as an indication, Sony just suspended orders for nearly all SD express memory cards due to global semiconductor memory shortages due to the helium. The U.S. sold off its strategic helium reserve years ago. 40% of global supply is now offline. This isn't balloons at parties. It's the fragile backbone of semiconductors, healthcare, and space tech. The war is eating its own technocratic brain. Maybe it's all for a good reason. And if the helium crisis wasn't disrupting enough, as it tanks companies like Oracle, who just laid off 18% of its global workforce, around 30,000 people who got an email terminating them right before their morning coffee, now here comes this beauty. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the charming folks in Tehran who wake up every morning wondering how they can make the world a slightly shittier place, issued a public statement through their official SIPA news propaganda outlet. SIPA news propaganda outlet. I think I'm saying that completely incorrectly. And all their affiliated mouthpieces, like Tasnim, they're warning employees of major U.S. tech companies operating in the Middle East to get the hell out of their workplaces immediately. The deadline? 8 o'clock Tehran time on Wednesday, April 1st, 2026. Yes, April Fool's Day. After that, the IRGC says they'll treat these companies' regional facilities as legitimate targets for retaliation. They're accusing them of being in cahoots with the U.S. and Israel, helping with assassinations of Iranian leaders and using all that fancy tech for targeting. Oh, brilliant. Because nothing says strategic military genius like threatening to blow up some Google offices and Apple stores in the Gulf because you're pissed off at the big bad West. Let me get this straight. These clowns are basically saying, hey, if you work for a company that makes smartphones and search engines, better pack your shit and run, or we might just annihilate the building you're sitting in. And they're even telling nearby residents within a 1 kilometer radius to evacuate too, like they're doing everyone a favor. This is the same outfit that thinks sponsoring terrorism and shouting death to America is foreign policy. Now they've decided private companies are fair game in their little revenge fantasy. You gotta love it. 1 minute we're worried about running out of helium for party balloons. The next minute Iran's elite guard is turning Silicon Valley outposts into potential parking lots. What a time to be alive. So, helium is the precision strike, energy is the blunt force. Now, jet fuel prices in the U.S. doubled from $2.17 to $4.57 per gallon in the weeks that airlines warned inventories could run dry soon. Higher fares and cancellations are incoming. American Airlines is boarding people onto buses in the hopes that they won't notice that it isn't a plane. In Europe, jet fuel spiked over 100% since the conflict escalated. Airlines are rerouting, burning more fuel on longer paths. Australia is nearly out of diesel. It may actually be out by now. Supermarkets face empty shelves as semis can't deliver. South Korea doesn't produce much oil or gas. They import nearly everything. And their giant Samsung and SK Hynix chip plants are absolute energy monsters that suck up massive amounts of electricity. South Korea is weighing the first public driving restrictions in 35 years if oil hits 120 to 130 a barrel, which is getting close to. They've activated a wartime economic response body.
Chanju, what is the South Korean government doing to address all of these problems?
They've launched a full-scale emergency economic response involving the offices of the president, the prime minister, and more. 5 task forces focused on different aspects of the problem will meet twice a week. The government will also look at longer-term steps like strengthening supply chains and shifting to other sources of energy like coal and nuclear. They're also looking to pass a war supplementary budget, and they're urging the public to conserve energy. The government has also imposed a 5-day vehicle rotation system for public sector employees. It's the first such measure since the oil price surge of 2011. Private sector participation is voluntary for now, but could become mandatory if things get worse. Concern is also growing about what some are calling a possible April supply crisis. Experts warn that if constraints on the Strait of Hormuz continue, supplies of crude oil and naphtha could be even more severely disrupted by next month. A shortage of naphtha could even halt the production of snack and noodle containers. But the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Resources has dismissed these fears.
We're working to secure alternative supplies, and with our strategic reserves, we can say there will be no significant issues in April.
The challenge facing the government now is how exactly to secure that supply and how to protect people's livelihoods from the soaring prices. They already introduced a price ceiling on gasoline earlier in March. Now, 2 weeks into the program, they're expected to announce a new price ceiling on Friday. Many are worried it will be even higher, so there is still a lot of frustration and angst about where things might go from here.
Egypt is taking the head start on the lockdowns. They've ordered shops and restaurants to close by 9 p.m. on weekdays and have people work from home for a month, and internally shifted to war economy mode amid power cuts and blackouts that have turned Cairo dark. Turkey burned through $30 billion in March alone defending the lira and eyes selling national gold reserves. Pakistan's prime minister announced government salary cuts and 50% fuel allocation reductions, plus an austerity fund.
And here in Thailand, the surge is dealing a heavy blow to the fishing industry. More than half of the country's fishing vessels have been forced to suspend operations. This port in Samut Sakhon province produces one of the country's largest hauls. But fuel prices have more than doubled since February, and many businesses are now losing money on fishing operations. 120 of the 300 fishing boats here are now docked.
The fuel prices now are the highest I've ever seen. Right now, we cannot see an end to the crisis.
The government is scrambling to take action. It's now supplying fishers with a blended fuel that includes 20% palm oil at a reduced price.
And to add insult to injury, Iran has threatened to cut undersea internet cables in the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. They carry 95 to 97% of global internet traffic, that handles the bank transfers, the stock trades, the cloud data. The cables like Falcon, See Me We 6, those. Of course, everyone knows those. And others are at risk. No cuts yet, but rerouting, insurance repricing, and latency fears are already hitting. I can't stand latency. Starlink is positioned as the backup with terminals on rerouting tankers, and even water becomes an issue, as Qatar warns the Gulf could run out of water in just 3 days if seawater turns radioactive. Contamination would cascade into energy, industry, and humanitarian disasters. In Corpus Christi, Texas, faces near depleted water from drought, plus refinery boom residents were told to let gardens die while the corporate use continues on. The economic dominoes away from the dollar have been tipped. Governments are activating defensive measures while publicly claiming stability. Russia banned cash exports over $100,000 and gold bars over 100 grams, and that was March 26th. Iraq banned 22 banks from using U.S. dollar transactions. Full government cashless mandate by July 2026. India quietly created a $6.7 billion economic stabilization fund buried in their budget supplements. The Bank of Japan sold 602.8 billion yen, that's $4 billion in U.S. assets. So, where are we headed? Well, in the short term, the next 3 to 6 months, maybe the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on the speed of this thing, widespread plant slowdowns or prioritization fights over chips for AI military versus the consumer and the need for chips for MRIs will increase. Airline capacity will cut flights and fares will spike into the stratosphere. Regional blackouts will occur in the United States. Power rationing, expanding, i.e. the Egypt-style lockdown measures we're already seeing. Food transport inflation accelerating as diesel jet fuel shortages bite into it. Stockpiling and panic in vulnerable places like Australia with diesel runs. South Korea driving people to the ATMs. Semiconductor memory shortages hitting cameras, phones, storage devices. And in the medium term, 6 to 12 months, if there's no resolution, the helium-driven chip shortages could stall AI scaling and delay semiconductors. I can take the AI scaling, causing broader recession risks as energy food costs erode consumer spending, Countries that are desperately trying to protect their collapsing currencies will start slapping on strict capital controls, basically locking down money so it can't easily leave the country. Gold hoarding or de-dollarization will accelerate. Water crises will spiral in Gulf states if escalation contaminates desalination. Companies will start rushing to bring their factories and supply chains back home instead of relying on foreign labor, which sounds great, but that will have massive costs to the consumer. Governments may start rationing food, fuel, and electricity even more while cutting spending incredibly hard. This kind of tough austerity could push people to the breaking point, and we just went through COVID, and test how stable society really is. It's not going to be pretty. One small bit of hope: companies might speed up work on recycling helium, finding new ways to cool the machines, or building more nuclear and renewable power plants. But even if they push that hard, those fixes will take years, not months. And if all that wasn't enough to make your head spin, you know what really cracks me up? All those geniuses in suits on TV talking about looming attacks and sleeper cells, like it's some complicated chess game that an inept leadership at the FBI and the underfunded DHS is going to keep an eye on. But you know which way the wind blows. It's just the same old story. A bunch of pissed off fanatics who've been sitting quietly in our neighborhoods waiting for the right moment to light the fuse. One choke point war in the Strait of Hormuz, and suddenly every port, every undersea cable landing station, every refinery water intake becomes a juicy target. These sleeper cells don't need tanks or fighter jets. They just need a couple of guys with box cutters and a truck full of fertilizer, or a laptop and a prayer. Maybe it's a good thing the fertilizer is in such short supply. And while the vacationing morons in Congress are busy squabbling like WWF wrestlers over the priorities of woke lobbyists, trying to put tampons in the Baltimore Orioles men's bathroom at Camden Yards, and arguing about the dead gender lunacy language of pronouns, these boys are probably already practicing their knots and memorizing shift changes at the local helium terminal, because nothing says modern civilization like realizing your fancy AI-powered world can be brought to its knees by a few dedicated psychos who hate you more than they love living. Well, that's all the time I had for tonight on this show that shines a harsh spotlight on the ugly truth nobody else wants to talk about. Of course, there's a mountain of other insanity piling up out there, and I'll be back next time to rip the lid off of more of it later this week. But tonight I just wanted to make damn sure anybody kept you up to speed on the completely predictable cluster that always follows when a bunch of medieval lunatics in Iran decide to play with the global off switch. Because that's what this is, folks. A handful of angry clowns with serious weapons and a death wish, putting a chokehold on modern civilization and squeezing until the whole thing starts turning blue. Helium for the chips, fuel for the planes, food on the shelves, internet cables, everything we thought was unbreakable has always been in the back of the minds of lunatics who want us all to go back to living in caves. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, subscribe to the Bowne Report on Substack. I'll keep digging so you don't stay in the dark. And come say hello to me, agree with me, or call me an insult of your choosing on X at Newsbound, or chat with me on Substack. They report glorious explosions. I report consequences, whether they like it or not. I'm John Bowne, and I'm still reporting.